vegetation on the site. We could see fish history on the site. There's a whole bunch of geomorphology. There's a whole bunch of things that can be expressed on this site, and we definitely would plan on utilizing it as much as possible. It's a good question.
I think related to your question, on the diagram, these are just very conceptual, but you can see on the interpretive trails, we have a series of red, orange dots there, and we listed potential topics or areas of emphasis. And I think as the plan moves forward, we want the interpretive story that is so integrated with how the building works. We want that same approach to the site. So yes, we'll be looking for opportunities. I think I overheard a conversation in the break about the old water wheel that was on the pond.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, we haven't fully fleshed all the possibilities out, but we will be exploring options like that.
And of course, this is just the beginning, and the process will go on for some time in design. You know, as you guys do fundraising and understand what your options are relative to costs and things, there's going to be a lot of investigation of other options. So one of the things about Portico is we're really storytellers. We're architects, landscape architects, and exhibit designers primarily, but our objectives for those three disciplines is to tell a story. And as you saw at Baker City, we try to find out what's integral, what the integral story of this is, and convey it to the visitor.
What I noticed there was people would come up to the parking, and whether they're adults or children, they'd run out of the cars or run over to the wagons, and they really jazz once they got into the building, and they're ready to go for the whole thing.
Did you even get the idea that the parking lots are circling the wagons? That there was that sense that as you're driving in, it's a big circle and you're circling.
Yeah, it was the modern day Winnebagos instead of the Calistogas.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if you're going to get to it, but are you going to talk about cost to operate and what your anticipated need for number of bodies to run this is?
We're going to, after the Q&A, we're going to talk about construction and total project cost. There is a companion document that the Oregon Community Planning Workshop, which is part of University of Oregon, and Rodney and who was the director who came to our last workshop? Bob Parker. So yes, there is an entire study that was completed last summer, and it talks about attendance projections, expenses, and revenues, and that expenses directly relate to operational cost. Ken?
Yeah, when we were looking at the 4 different options, this one that came out of the process was number 2. Number 4 generated a lot of interest because of the glass component factor. Have you looked at doing some sort of glass enclosure? You've got 2 proposals, you know, the wood, the earthen. Did you look at glass?
No, we didn't, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier. There's a myriad of schemes.
Okay.
We chose 2 of them that we thought were compelling relative to the story that's being told. But then again, glass is a material, and one of the things we'll be deciding in the future is how to use materials, and it's very likely there will be glass, although we didn't do a glass box. We kind of dropped that scheme as an option for various reasons related to impact on the historic district.
And that was more locational, but I think Mike from BLM asked me a question about glazing as an option too during the break. And one of the things that we took to the SHPO meeting were actually examples of contemporary buildings in historic districts, and that many of the examples we actually took off the National Park website as what they were promoting as appropriate directions. And that idea of glass and reflectivity and transparency, so that is, I think, maybe another criteria that we should
and again, these are very diagrammatic, but the big structure that goes through the center of the building would most likely be glass in order to get light in, to get that sense of being able to see the trees, things like that. So yeah, good. Christie mentioned the water wheel, which I loved, and we found out from Ken exactly where that water wheel was originally, and the water wheel was used to power the project
Yeah, it
originally.
generated electricity on the site for lighting, also for pumping, and off to the left portion of that diagram, there's an area where an ice house was, and
Right.
ran the
Yeah.
compressors there.
Right.
It also ran grinders. When the carcasses of the fish were dried, they were converted into fish food.
And so, I mean, if you think about this, you know, everybody now talks about being off the grid, right? Off the grid, and how that's our objective now is to create sustainable buildings. This project was sitting out in the middle of nowhere, created its own, from the water sources, it created its own power and did all of its work without being connected to any grids. So it's kind of back to the future in this case, and it would be great. Christie wanted to come up with an idea that the Corps of Engineers could tell a story here. And what I thought was cool is if we restored the water wheel and we talked about that, that's really what we're looking to in the future. People are looking to being off the grid and not taking you know, carboniferous resources to create power, but this is a sustainable power source. So that would be a really great story to tell and fun.
And the
Well,
other thing about, I just want to mention the other thing about, you know, the Corps of Engineers or EWEB having the opportunity to tell a story at the site is that we might pay for it.
Oh!
So when you're developing exhibits, think about sponsors of your exhibits. You'll see that sometimes in museums it'll say this exhibit sponsored by such and such, and so that's, you know, EWEB might not, you know, obviously right across the river there's a dam that's creating electricity using the power of the McKenzie River.
Right.
And so that just seems like a story that
Right, it's a great story. And how much are you committed? Tom, could you get that?
Scratch that.
Moving water in itself is a great attraction. You know,
Right.
Yeah.
The water wheel that out there in the center of that pond would be wonderful.
Yeah.
And I think even the sluiceways, the concrete channels that are on the site, I think reintroducing water as part of that story and the history of the hatchery as well. Steve?
Dennis, Bill, talking about telling the BLM story or the Corps of Engineers story or the Forest Service story or EWEB story or whatever story. We talked about in the early, back in 2012 when we had the meeting that Jan facilitated and we developed the concept for themes, talking about the river and the boats and the fish. We also at the same time, and I know this is Jan's area, but I just want to put this on the table because we always laugh when we talk about money, but we're going to talk about money or the lack of it. But toward the end of the day, but in 2012 we talked about rotating exhibits that related to our partners. And so I just wanted to say that in the building, Bill, I think we're talking about what, 35,000 square feet?
33 something.
33. That while those exhibits are designed to be thematic and relatively permanent, we also have the flexibility for rotating demonstrations of themes.
Right.
So for example, if the Corps, exactly.
Changing exhibits,
If
right at the front
If
door.
the Corps had a theme they wanted to present for a year, my question is, or if EWEB had an auxiliary supporting theme, or BLM did, Bill, where would we do that?
Well, we have the changing exhibits here that's right at the front door. There's also, we've designated, so there's kind of issues of circulation, and we've created this great hall, which is circulation space, but it would also be a perfect place for something like that to go in and be able to be rotated through. And both of these are immediately seen by visitors. The very first thing, both of those spaces are accessible to
Let me
visitors.
just add, you know, one of the continuing, I mean, right now the National Marine Fisheries Service is soliciting scoping statements on the EIS for the hatchery for the 4 HGMPs. And of course, that then a real quick segue to downstream passage of smolt in Cougar Reservoir, Cougar Dam. That's a sub-theme for the fish and the ecology. So if there was a year-long demonstration on that whole conservation program relating to the Corps and ODFW and National Marine Fisheries Service, where would that be, Bill? Is there room up there in the fish park?
Well,
For,
you know,
for
to tell you the truth, these are bubbles. And yes, and it's kind of like Ken's question and a number of other questions. We have way far to go, in the design. These are very preliminary ideas, and understanding exactly how these spaces are configured or even located is something for the future. So I don't want to put you off, but basically, yes.
There's room. No, I
Yeah,
want to hear you say, and that's the only point I wanted to
there's
put
room.
on the table.
That's what I'm saying. In this scheme, there's room in here, but we don't really know what's in these spaces. Are designated by rule of thumb and by kind of understanding what's required to get exhibits.
But I
in.
heard your answer is that when we get to the actual design stage, we can build the flexibility into that to accommodate those kinds of changing supplemental exhibits.
And in fact, when you see what's coming up next, and you probably didn't notice this, but there's some P's up here. There's a P1, a P2, and a P3, and that P stands for phase. And phasing.
Oh, yes, okay.
And so what will need to happen, if this is phase 1, we still want to be able to tell all the stories in phase 1. We're not going to just say, oh, forget about fish, or we're not going to say, forget about the McKenzie River Trail. We're going to want to tell those stories within the phase 1 space, and then the phase 2 space, and the phase 3 space. And Jan has said, I think pretty consistently, that there's flexibility in how these exhibits get installed, and that they can be moved around as needed. Welcome.
That's my wife.
I know that.
Ashley, I think you had a question?
Yeah, and you were just talking about phases. So are you talking about phases in construction, and that you would build these different portions, in phases, or trying to incorporate all of the contents of the different exhibits and mention it in each section of that?
Yeah, I think we had a meeting or phone call a couple weeks ago, and I was reflecting and trying to think about what was the purpose of this study we were doing, and I came to the conclusion that it was to answer 2 questions. What will fit on the site in a way that will create a great visitor experience and be respectful of the natural attributes? And the second question is, how much is this going to cost? And when we finish the questions, we're going to move in and we're going to give some possible scenarios to answer your question. So if I could just put you off for a moment, that'll be the very next thing we'll talk about.
Sounds good.
Randy?
This is, I'm really excited about the idea of preserving this place, the fish hatchery. Personally, it's one of my favorite places to stop and spend time when we're traveling up and down the river. And this is also the first time I've kind of sat in on these meetings that I know have been happening for a long time. So this is much grander than what I realized, but very exciting. And I'm trying to think about the realistic, ongoing success of the Interpretive Center, and also looking at how to get people there and to keep people coming. Obviously there's a seasonality of how many people are traveling up and down the highway throughout the year for various reasons, but is there a visitor center component or a partnership with the McKenzie Chamber of Commerce or something where it kind of also, in addition to the museum and showcasing the history and preserving that and connecting that to people, visitors or visitors who've lived here for a long time, is there a component where it's also attracting people for information that they'll go out, enjoy this interpretive center, learn about the history of this place and all the amazing things of the trail, McKenzie Trail, but then also have the opportunity to get information to go out and travel up and down the river, you know, stay in the lodges, eat in the restaurants, enjoy the natural features that this place, the McKenzie has to offer. Just again, that's kind of a really big question and coming in kind of late in the phase, so just wanted to, you know, put that out there and see what conversations or visions.
I think Ken wants to answer your question.
Yeah, again, going back to the 1990s, I've been on the state board in various positions, president, board member, whatever, and on liaison with the Friends of the Fish Hatchery, and we do have the brochure wraps on site there, which are maintained by the Kingwood Commons volunteers. And it's probably one of the biggest points of distribution of information about these things that we have. There's 3 other sites, but this is the biggest one. And in the 1990s, when the decision was made to preserve the site, we went to the U.S. Forest Service for a grant to renovate the buildings and create the information center at that point in time, with the rationale of connecting with people visiting the areas to either extend their stay or give them information that would cause them to plan future trips to the area. So that's been part of the underlying rationale for this whole program right from the start.
I think this is it's a really good question, Randy, and I think this is the time to start introducing some ideas about that interconnectivity and to get people involved at different levels, different places to be involved here, and that will impact the design and understanding of what the building can do. Because the lobby could be way more than just the lobby for this. This could be the lobby for the region if that would work. So we're very, even though we made some pictures that look like buildings, we're very early in the process. What we were hired to do was a master plan. And the site master plan is critical to have in order to know where to put things and where not to put things. And a lot of what Dennis talked about is where not to put things. We don't want to ruin stuff. But we've gone just a little bit into architecture, but it's basically about master planning the site so we know where stuff's going to be in the future and know what the requirements are and all of that. But this is the time to have other people become engaged with this project and to get excited about it. It's one of the reasons for having renderings is to get people to say, wow, look, they're really doing something here, and let's get on board. So it's a good question and an important question to ask of everyone.
Roger?
Just a recollection, one of our early meetings, the context for discussion really revolved around the interpretive center not necessarily being the destination point, but a springboard for the rest of the river community.
Would it make sense to have an area that would be a gift shop and an information center where you don't pay an entry fee? You come in, you get information, and then you go, hey, maybe we should go check out the museum, and then you pay your $7 or $10 or whatever it is, and go in. Or you say, oh, let's come back another day because we were going to go for a hike, and you go for a hike instead, and you come back another day. But where you can come in, get information, buy things, but not necessarily pay an entrance fee.
Yeah, buy things. Money again?
Maps.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Basically set up a pre-ticketing area that will both be useful and also entice people to see the rest of the facility.
And that's very common in museums and sites where there's an admission. And I think it relates to information, gift shops, and even food service. And I know we aren't talking about that here, but it's a way of making it a community resource. And as you said, it's the enticement of a little bit and come back the second time.
Yeah, well, and it's a high need, I think, for that information piece, that component, because I live downriver, so I come upriver to recreate on a regular basis. And when the ranger station closed on the weekend, we no longer had access to trail maps and this and that, and it's like, wow, that's a huge hole. for anybody, and I'm familiar with this area, what about people that are brand new? Where are they getting that information?
What's here? Yeah, no, that's really good. That's perfect.
Tom, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to reaffirm what Roger said, that is, the concept has always been that our interpretive center will be a gateway to the McKenzie Valley.
Gateway.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should get that in the title, I think.
Yeah, I just was right.
Well, the good thing is the location is.
Springfield's already.
And you're giving information about people traveling in either direction.
How about if we take one or two more questions, and then I want to make sure that before the lunch break that we sort of wrap the stuff up. George, you had a question? No? I mean,
Dana.
Dana.
Was any thought in the design phase given to minimizing the amount of people it would take to run this? Because the ongoing cost is gonna be a huge factor on whether this is feasible or not. And designing the interpretive center so that several people could run it with a volunteer or two might be much better than like the High Desert Museum that takes 41 people to run and 200 volunteers.
Yeah, I think that.
We don't have those resources here.
I think, at the site alternative or decision-making, one of the criteria was a dispersed set of buildings would take more to operate, not only people, but also energy and resources. And a singular building might be easier to maintain and operate. I think a lot of when we have designed visitor centers, we thought about how people in a lobby function, that in lower visitation times, one person could be the front desk, the gift shop, and then at higher visitation times, you might have 3 people doing that. But yes, that is part of thinking about space planning so that people could see different areas and have play multiple roles to the visitor and trying to keep staffed in.
Yeah, and also a volunteer program is really critical to the success of this. So that you get, the boat guy here wants to tell those boat stories, the fish guy here wants to tell the fish stories, and you have those people. What we found in the facilities that we design and that continue to operate is that people love the human contact. I mean, you can give them a big place with lots of gewgaws, but they really like the human story and the human contact. So that the volunteers and having people in those spaces is critical.
Yeah, volunteers are hard to find nowadays.
One more question.
Volunteer
Ashley.
firefighters, so
This might be more for the Friends group, but in terms of the historic district, have you looked into the grants that are available through Oregon Heritage? Because I think that there are 4 potentially applicable grants that you all could use to begin restoration on the historic buildings. You mentioned that they're quite dilapidated, so that might be a first step to try and start renovating the space into new uses.
So we're gonna go back to the show, and Steve asked me.
By the way, that's a really good point. And just to, again, talk about where we're at and what the future is. And the future is coming up with an organization that can do marketing, can do fundraising, can understand what those, go out and find those resources, because that's totally, completely critical to your success.
Yeah.
Good question.
Before we go to phasing, Steve asked me just to sort of recap and go back to this slide, that part of any design or planning process, I like to refer to it, there's sort of the right brain, creative side, intuitive, I really like that, here's some great ideas. But there's also the left brain, or more analytical, or more rationale behind decision making. And I wanted just to go back to this to say that we engaged in both of those ways of thinking about the project. And a lot of times when you go to granting agencies or banks, the whole financial aspect of a project is equally as important as the design aspect. And we started this as our list, and this list could be expanded, and I wanted to just reference, like under site, we want to be able to look at any plan or any alternative and actually answer the question, did we do this? And so we had about maintaining the natural setting, thinking about site carrying capacity and not putting too much on this piece of property. Do we have views to the McKenzie? Did we save the existing Douglas Fir Grove? And are we being acknowledging of the historic district boundaries and that the character that one has when they walk out there now? Will it still be there when this project is complete? And we wanted to, we're calling it preserve and restore the existing wetlands. This is just an intuitive thought that the pond and that old meander scar may or may not be a wetland, but it functions as a regional biologic water treatment zone. And so we want to be environmentally responsible and make that even better. On the buildings, we came up with some criteria. I think it really, the primary one was about, is this the appropriate scale of a visitor center that complements the existing historic district? Are we making a light touch on the land, which relates back to some of the site criteria? We wanted to restore and the hatchery buildings. So as we think about funding and phasing and where dollars go, are we actually doing our best to preserve those buildings? We don't want to build a brand new building and wait 20 years to address any of the issues of retaining the hatchery buildings. So that these are some of the ones we had, but again, I think going back when you're making a case statement to a potential granting agency or funders or regulatory agencies or partners, being able to say that you considered both realms of feasibility for a project. And Dana, your questions about operations and cost, that is important. There is the community workshop study, but that continues. It's not just a study that was done and was put aside. The project needs to continually look at staffing and operations, costs and revenues.
And that the design is informed by those studies, because sometimes studies get done, as he said, they put it on the shelf, and then later on somebody comes back and says, well, did you think about this? And you realize that you didn't go back and keep touching base with these initial ideas and requirements that have been set up. So that's really important to the project.
So I want to move on here because lots of questions about that second criteria that we thought was important at this stage was how much does it cost and how do we think about that? So this is that section of the agenda. And before I start talking about dollars, I think one of the pieces of advice that we've given to the Friends group is that there is construction cost, which is what you pay a contractor and an exhibit fabricator to build this, but there are other project costs. And as reference, oftentimes depending on how much fundraising dollars want to cover those other costs, that can be 40 to 50% of the value of the building and exhibit cost. And so we usually have these buckets called hard cost, which is the construction cost, and soft cost, which are things like you may hire a staff and administrator, so you're going to have your own project management, operational, organizational cost. There are design fees and planning fees. There are permits and environmental or entitlement steps that you're going to have to go through. There's a phrase called furniture fixtures.
Furniture and
It's FF&E.
FF&E. Right.
So oftentimes a construction budget very rarely covers the desks and the bookshelves for the staff that operate this. So there's always an allocation for that. There's various contingencies, and there are design contingencies because of things we don't even know about yet. And there are construction contingencies because you need a reserve fund to address unknowns that happen. So that bucket, if you had an example of a $1 million project, we recommend you need to allocate $400,000 to cover those other project costs.
And those are directly connected. Those aren't. This isn't free money. They're directly connected to the $1 million cost. That the soft costs and the hard costs go together, and they remain together, and they are necessary. So that's some people think of the soft cost as like a slush fund. Oh, we have $1 million for the building and we have $400,000 set aside for something else, and we can use that. Well, you can't use that. It is integral to the process and the cost of the project. So it's really important to keep that in mind. There's just, those costs are there. They will be there.
The other thing we looked at when we looked at your preliminary budgets, there's 3 basic components of the construction cost. When Jan did her look at that, her primary input was on the exhibit cost, and that was a multi-million-dollar figure. There is the bucket for the building cost, and even at this stage, we know for a museum interpretive center that we need to be in the $400 a square foot value to build that building. But there's also site cost, and the site costs are primarily related to earthwork, planting, and restoration to build a parking lot, to do a building pad. And then there are lesser costs, but important to build interpretive trails and pieces. So we've looked at that piece as well to give you an understanding of the order of magnitude as you go forward. And I think the answer, we've said that actually the answer to the question of how much will it cost is actually another question, which is, what is the capacity of the organization and the community to raise monies to build this? So and those 2 questions are not independent. We could design a $40 million project that is the whiz-bang, world-class facility and amaze everyone. We could also design a $15 million project that has the same storylines, that conveys the same messages, but in a more, less robust way. And all projects, when they're at this level of conceptualization, they're always balancing that question of what's the capacity to raise money to do this? Then how does that translate to how big of a project should we dream of? And then the related question is, once we've built that, how much revenue can we generate by admissions, by rental fees, by special events, to pay for the staff that operates this? So the feasibility study has answered some of those questions. What we want to provide a framework for the next steps is this question of how can we start to think about that? And what I want to then just summarize, these were the costs that I was describing in categories. Site, building, interpretive equals construction cost. Soft cost is that 40% rule, and what's the total project cost? And so we have structured this from going from a $16 million project to a $43 million project. And what we want to talk about is not an approach of, oh my God, we'll never raise $43 million, the project is dead. What we want to do is to give you a different way of imagining how you answer this question, which is, there's a whole range of ways you could think about this. And we want to show you that if the decision is the capacity is $16 million, you have a way forward. If the capacity is at the other end of the spectrum, you have a more robust way forward. If you want to think about the High Desert Museum as a model that you're trying to emulate, that is a project that has grown over time, over its 30 to 40-year history. And so they phased that. And there are many projects out there that, like the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle. They had a $90 million budget. They renovated the old Naval Training Center on South Lake Union, and they did it all at once.
Yeah, because Seattle has 14 trillionaires. You know, I mean, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, all those people, you know, and they just forked out the money. So if that's where it's at.
But you know, at the other end of the spectrum, we've had a few clients like that, but most of our clients have a budget. And either they want a master plan and think that this is our vision for the next 50 years. And we want a roadmap of where to put things now, and equally where not to put things as personalities change and different ideas come along. So oftentimes that's the context of where you're at now, is you're doing a long-range plan. And once we answer these questions of fundraising feasibility and the capacity that you can raise, then we'll tailor a project that fits that level. So what this chart is just showing is that we've actually done what we call a cost opinion, or an estimate of probable cost. And we have lots of details we can share with the Friends group, but we chose to make this sort of phased approach that was both, had some logic and scale, but it also related to some very specific components of the project. And at the top, just for simplicity, I'll start at the bottom. The total, everything we've shown you, from the large buildings to trails to chairlifts to zip lines to parking to exhibits. Renovation of the existing buildings.
Reuse of those buildings.
We think is in the magnitude of $40 million. And there's a specific number because we had a spreadsheet, but these are early on sort of, reasonable allocations of square foot costs, but it's in that order of magnitude. So then we stepped back and we said, to get to the lower end, 16 million, it means we're going to build about 40% of that 33,000 square foot building, and we're going to build 40% of the exhibits, and we're going to build the parking and sort of the site development in that immediate environment. And then we were sort of targeting, okay, what's a $25 million range? And it's a little bit of math working both ways, but let's say, what if we did 2/3 of the building exhibits and a little bit more of the site? And then we said, what would it cost to do the full building? And that's kind of in that $37, $38 million site. And then we layered in renovation of the historic buildings and all the site trails, and that got us to the complete package. And this is just like Bill's explanation of the architecture. This is just a first pass. The actual configuration will play out over time. And then we wanted to just sort of graphically sort of give a visual as to sort of how much that would be. And so, again, on the computer screen, it's much clearer, but this is overlaid on that 40-acre site. And we're showing, a first phase would be the parking and the central core of the building. A second phase, or a larger first phase project, would be do 2/3 of the building and exhibits. A third phase project would be all of the exhibits. A fourth phase would complete historic district renovations and trails, and would allow you then to complete the entire site. So that's kind of a quick overview. The message we really want to convey is there are lots of possibilities, and today is, or this week, or this month, or this year, you don't have to make those decisions now, because what we think, sort of laying out, there's a lot of next steps that will go into this, and I think we kind of listed sort of in broad sequence. I believe there's still a meeting set for February that Mike Russell and the Friends group are going to the Lane County Park Commissioners. They're the landowners on the job, or the property. They are an integral partner to making this happen. So starting to get elected officials or appointed officials involved in the process is a key next step. We've mentioned the fundraising feasibility study. Organizations like you either confer with colleagues or they hire professional fundraising consultants. It's that whole question of what is the capacity of the community, and then what's a process to go and make those asks. We think that's really the most important step.
And notice that's a study of the feasibility of fundraising. That's critical, because what you need is to have somebody come in and say, this community, this project, and even this state or even national sources of funding, this is the amount of money that we feel, from a professional standpoint, not us, but the fundraising consultant, this is the amount of money that you can raise. That brings clarity to people's vision. When when somebody who knows what they're doing, knows all of the agencies and the various people who can contribute money to this, and get an understanding of that, that then really is the base master plan for what you can do immediately. And if this place is successful and you do they say you can raise $16 million. If this is successful, then over time, the other portions of the facilities can be built. And we feel the design should reflect that kind of phasing possibility, so that you're adding on to an existing project and creating a vision that is some years in the future.
Yes.
As we talk about going into the future, what do you think the increase in cost on an annual basis would be?
Well, in fact, it doesn't make any difference, because the increase in cost for us to the future is something that might be shocking. In the future, that won't be shocking anymore. So it's not an issue. Time will tell.
You're saying the capacity to raise money inflates at the same rate as the cost?
Yes, exactly. That's one possibility. One possibility is there's some calamitous economic situation.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happens. And then the other possibility that I see for this region, or that I think this whole area is going to change in how the public sees it as a resource, and that there's a real possibility that this area could become a bigger thing than it is right now. It's kind of and you can tell me if I'm full of crap or not, but basically it was built on the drift boats were about certain activities that aren't, those specific activities are not necessarily in existence anymore, or on their way out, and there may be other activities that are coming in. This is about marking a place in time about the history of this river and the drift boats. But in the future, this area may change, and in fact, this could be the center of a whole region that is geared towards tourism, towards sustainability. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things and activities that could occur in the future that we don't really know about. But I see an amazing future for this area because it's so close to a metropolitan area that is very likely to expand. Because this is the kind of real place that people want to come to, and I think that is really the future of the river. Is that this is real, and that you can have real experiences here, and do real things, and be really excited about it. So,
just like we said, there's a left brain and right brain to the whole process. Well, the left brain answer to your question is that these numbers don't include inflation. We have used, on average, figures that 3% a year is kind of an average 21st century inflation rate. Oftentimes, at this stage of the game, particularly when we work with more of the financial side of consulting around this, they generally recommend of just saying inflation isn't included because it's so variable. But if you are in a fundraising mode and you have a target date, and you're trying to then say, how much money do we need to raise? Yes, you need to think about that. But until there's a target date, those numbers, 3% compounded over 20 years, the numbers just get really, really big.
Sure.
And so you have to account for it, but it's something to be aware of, and when more concrete answers are given, then you should think about that in your budget and fundraising goals.
and if you look back, it's shocking how cheap things were in the past, and we're all shocked by that. But in the past, those things were as expensive as they are now. It's, you know what I mean? So that's why I say it's not something you really need to worry about, because the future will take care of itself.
Would you mind going back to the slide that showed the boat motif theme, so I could maybe do a better job of visualizing.
Why don't you
go on
go
the
back to the, so I
way
can,
back.
and I'll talk about the phasing, because I think that's,
Oh, I see, yes.
yeah, this, the boat. Look, that one, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, at a little larger scale, how would we phase into that, looking at the numbers we put on?
So, phase 1 is there, phase 2 is there, phase 3 is there. That's how it breaks down.
Would you build the whole frame of the building and just only develop the part that's in the phase 1 section? Or would you actually only build that part of the building?
Yes. You guys are so great about looking into the future. I just love this. This is really great. Yeah, the answer is yes. And the answer is yes because, but that's a great idea. Because you wouldn't, we're not creating sausage here. You know, we're not getting a pound of sausage and then 2 pounds of sausage and then 3 pounds of sausage. We're creating a building. And so, again, I remind you, and don't want to harp on this too much, but this is a diagram, and the images are diagrams of what at this point, what we see as, in order to guide things like fundraising, and in order to guide things like scope and all of that stuff, these are the pieces we kind of see. But this is not real quite yet. And so when the fundraisers come in and say you can come up with $20 million, then we're going to go back and we're going to look at this and design what we need to design. And maybe in order for this to be expressive and look complete, maybe this swoop is there, but the rest of it isn't, and this portion gets built. So the answer is that's again a kind of future issue. What will happen in the future?
You know, I think it's another way the way I've thought about this, and maybe it's the sausage analogy. We aren't going to design a building that's the full footprint and chop it off and have 2 blank walls on the edge. If we will, the challenge as a design team will be that a phase 1 building looks complete.
Right.
And the second challenge is we will design it in such a way that if there is a future expansion, it can be added on in a way that it's complete.
Right.
So right now, we in many ways, we did a spreadsheet exercise and then just said, okay, if we had 40% of the building, we know we need a lobby and an entry, and we need some exhibit galleries, and that's about the level we went at. Bill and Jan were both, I guess, cautionary when we said it doesn't mean we aren't going to tell the stories that currently are on the left or the right of that centerpiece. We will reconfigure that interior on how to do it. Someone had an idea, well, how do we, if we design a whole gallery and then 10 years later we do an addition and we want to move things around, do we trash everything we did? And someone said, well, maybe we figure out a way that there really are rotating exhibits and they could be picked up and moved, or they're on platforms that allow some flexibility. So there's lots of creative thought that will go into how to make that phasing flexibility happen seamlessly.
Right. And you know, we all are thinking of these as rooms. Let's say we think of this as a room and that as a room and that as a room. But what if we just thought of that as one big space, and that function happened to be in there at the beginning? And in fact, we have the fish ecology in the space. We have you know, theater. Theaters are pretty specific, but a theater can be used in many different ways. So these could all meld into one big space. It could be this really, I don't know if you've been to the Exploratorium in San Francisco, but it's a kids' science center. And it's just one huge space, and it has all these different things happening, and you can go everywhere. So maybe the space at the beginning is this big, and then it gets expanded, and it gets expanded, and all of that stuff, you know, gets spread out, and there's new things that come in, as the money grows. Now, I think High Desert Museum has approached it. There's quite a bit of building, but then there's a lot of stuff out on the site in different locations, and it's kind of grown, I wouldn't say haphazardly, but somewhat organically. And one of the things that we're trying to point out is that because of the limits of the site, and there's only certain areas where you can build really significant things, and that's what this diagram's trying to express. Sir?
Question, you talked about professional fundraisers and things like that. Maybe this is out of ignorance, but when you talk about those, is there a segregation between grants and those types of funds and then corporate donations and personal donations? How does, or is it all just one big bucket?
Well, one of the things that Jan pointed out was one of the ways to do fundraising is to say, this is the, I don't know, who's looking?
Jan Coleman, Great Hall.
Yeah, or somebody who has money. When you go to Mohi, and by the way, I highly recommend that if you're in Seattle, that you go to the Museum of History and Industry. It is the best thing I have ever seen in my life. It is fantastic. And it has, it's kind of compartmentalized, kind of like you guys have been talking about. But it has the Bill Gates room, it has the Jeff Bezos room, it has the, whoever, the Microsoft room, the Boeing room, it has all those things. And she was suggesting, why not have the lobby that someone pays for? Why not have them, why not have this be the the Nike Theater, the Oregon people who have money come in and dedicate funds to create these things. And so it's a really good question. Some grants are very specifically oriented to, like, I want to...
Historic preservation grants,
yeah,
actually was mentioned.
Historic preservation grant goes to preserving the buildings. Natural resources folks are telling the story. So that, yes, that's, and what's interesting is these are all design criteria. And your question is really good because part of the design criteria is how you raise money and who is interested and who has who are stakeholders in this, and that's critical to the success of the project and also the success of fundraising.
It is critical, and I'm curious who we have created partnerships with, who's the friends we've already created partnerships with that are interested in seeing this project happen, like EWEB, like the Army Corps, like ODF&W with the fish viewing, and Travel Lane County, and you go on and on and on, the Lane County Historical Museum. Who else is kind of behind seeing this happen that can come to the table and helping to apply for those grant dollars? Because if you've got partnerships shown when you're applying for those grant dollars, it makes that grant application so much more valuable and easy to get, in addition to all the sponsorship opportunities for various spaces and business partnerships.
I know we have ODOT and we have the SHPO, so they're on board. But someone else needs to answer that question because you guys know what the...
all of the entities that you named are on our contact list and they're updated with every meeting.
But they haven't formally stepped up yet to be...
We haven't asked yet.
Yeah, see, and that's the interesting thing is you're at the kickoff. This is the time these materials will be consolidated into a package that people can understand, and they probably won't contain all of Dennis's lovely maps and things like that are, kind of esoteric, but it'll get more in the heart of what this facility will be and how it will be used and expressed in.
Yeah, I would just say that, we have the list of invitees that the Friends Group put together, Tom and Ken and Steve and others. There's 15 private and public and agency organizations that are represented by group here, but we're also represented at the October meeting. So I think that, as a front end organizing, I think lots of outreach effort was made to invite people to participate in this level.
Yeah, Dennis, obviously the board struggled with all these questions, but the one thing we knew, of course, before we attempted to answer a lot of these questions you said we ultimately must answer, and the most important one being, what's our capacity to raise money? The thing we realize, of course, is that you have to have some image or some vision of what the hell it is you want to raise the money for. And I think the one smart thing that we did was to ask you to help us do that. So now we have a package that I certainly would be proud to go anywhere with. It's finished up to say, here's the vision, here's the dream, and this is what it would look like. And then I think without any embarrassment, you can begin to ask, to make the ask. And one thing I want to say, I'm not sure that Jim from McKenzie Schools is still with us, but if he doesn't know, you'll soon find out that K7 through 12, Nate's class up at McKenzie has already designed the hydrological and geological component, and been invited us up on January 26th to see the designs that they already have in mind for the Interpretive Center. And I'm personally thrilled by that.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
Several of us are going to be there for that. So,
Well, and they're the future.
The reason I mentioned that, of course, is that it was just thrilling to see how the students have already plugged in to this opportunity without having seen the boat, if you will.
And I want to, not that porticos are not fundraising feasibility consultants, but we have worked with firms, and our 33-year practice has almost exclusively been private nonprofit and public clients. And all of the private nonprofit clients, that's the experience that sort of we're channeling our past clients. There are fundraising feasibility consultants, and they often target individual and foundation gifts. There are lots and lots of grant programs, and oftentimes our clients hire a grant writer who's a good writer, is poetic, but can answer sort of the factual, substantive questions as well, and respond to criteria that's in a particular grant program. So I think the answer to that question is I think it's more than one person, but the largest grants that we see come out of philanthropic giving, either by a foundation or by an individual philanthropist. And that's just my sense of talking to like directors, that's who they target. They want to get they seek out the major gifts, and then they augment with these smaller grants and smaller gifts.
If I may, mindful of the clock, it's high noon. And I want to just give a round of applause, please, to our... So the questions are right on the money, and the money's not here. But we have a plan, and we've consulted with Casey Woodard and with Eric McCready, professional fundraisers with years and years of experience. We know that in professional fundraising, you're going to have to spend 20 to 25% of your money, what you're going to raise, on fundraising. We have been told, and we believe that once we have this presentation to present to the Lane County Commissioners and convince them that they should give us a 99-year lease for nothing, because that will let us go out and raise money. Once we start our fundraising, we've been advised that you don't want to ask anybody for money until a donor steps up with $500,000 to fund your initial cost estimate. That's a big number. But we will never get there without big contributions. This is where it started. The customers of the McKenzie River Guides for years and years have said that they want to do something. We haven't asked anybody for money yet, but we're getting ready to do that, and so that is our current thought in our plan. Now, we can change it, but the professional advice we've got is to do it that way. So we're not going to be asking for any contributions until we identify that major donor to get us started, to hire a staff, to prepare the potential donor sheets, evaluate who can give how much money, all the professional fundraising, the grants, the nonprofits and all of that, to work all that together. So that's in the future. There's one other component here that we haven't mentioned. That is, when the University of Oregon study group, they gave us a hard number, kind of an estimate, that all of these interpretive centers are able to support their operating cost only to the tune of about 25% of their, with gate receipts. So my personal belief is I don't want to build anything unless we have an endowment to support the shortfall of the operating. In other words, don't build it and hope somebody's going to pay for it. Establish an endowment with the Oregon Community Foundation. I don't know whether that's $2 or $4 million, but have enough income, annual income from that to cover the shortfalls. That's all in the dream. And when I say dream, you know, the only reason we're involved with this is because it's impossible, but we're going to do it. You know, we're going to make it happen. Now, and we know something about impossible because it was here, I guess, in August. When did we go to?
August.
In August, Steve and I drove up, Steve Maley and I went up to Seattle to interview this great group, and we said, oh boy, we got to have them. And so then you know, what's it cost? Well, they put together a budget, it was just right at $60,000. Okay, and so I signed this contract. Yeah, we'll pay you $60,000. I don't know where the money's coming from. But the good news is that the first 30 we've raised, and here's $2,000 to bring us to the top, and we're current with them as of today. However, tomorrow, we owe them another $35,000 to cover everything they've done since October, and so we need to we need that money. So here on the table, contributions to the creation of the McKenzie River Interpretive Center. Ken has put these together. We are a 501c3, and we have wonderful new bylaws. We're completely legal and as clean as any 501c3 could be. So what we need before we break for lunch here is for you to help me raise $35,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
At one
You
time,
have 35,000?
Going once, going twice.
I know where there's about a third of that coming, and I'll
Oh.
tell you about it later, but
Oh.
at one time right here, talking to Fay Stewart, Commissioner Stewart, he said there's about 700 foundations that need to hear about you guys. And this was 7, 8 years ago. And we were just talking about this. And so how soon will that printed material, it could be that thick, how soon will that be able to go out to the Ford Foundation, the Gates Foundation, the Swindells Foundation?
We're nearly complete with our study. The way we talked about with Tom and Ken and Steve at one of our planning conference calls a few weeks back is that this PowerPoint or some edited version with your input as to what's the most helpful, this PowerPoint presentation is meant to be that tool. We have more detail and more backup. It's specifically, we have 3 pages, a Word text document that describes more succinctly than, I guess, the last 3 hours. But so we have the beginnings of a case statement that you could use. So we have articulated what's the big interpretive story, how does it play out on the site, what's our approach to the buildings and architecture. We have the detailed backup for those numbers. So we have those components, and we're probably a few days away from packaging it up. I think our intention was this process was informed last time by comments and critiques and questions. So the idea was that all of this information is on our website, and the Friends group has you just log on to our website and you click a button and you put in a password. All of this information is available for broader distribution. So we're very, very close, I guess is the question. A few weeks away. And that was the intention of this workshop, is to kind of give you a draft. Bill and I, and originally the intention, Jan, we were going to present this, use that as a sample test for you guys to go out and make your own presentation, and then your feedback will help us fine tune this, and if it's too long, we could easily make it a shorter version, or if you need something specific that you're going to get asked a question. I think Tom phrased it that our work is essentially complete, but we're available to answer questions and sort of help out and be an advisor as you guys plot the next steps.
Dennis, I guess we said one of the main objectives of the meeting today is to get some response from the stakeholders group about. I would like to know, at least I'd like to have the opportunity for anyone in this room to respond about whether or not this is on the right track, whether this is the right, is this the desirable preferred alternative? I haven't heard anyone say yes or no. I'd like to hear that.
I don't understand your question, Steve.
Are you saying, do we like it? Yeah.
I think that's his question.
Yeah, and that's a great word, inspiring. Is it inspiring? Has it taken the dream that you guys have and starts to make it real? And that making real of the dream then allows other people to see the dream in a way that's kind of hard to explain. And we've done this a number of times where people had basically no funds, and they were able to take the plans that we came up with and show them to people and say, oh, you're really going to do something. You're going to do something up there, right? Yeah. Okay, and then here's some commitment because that's really the next step. The only thing that can take this forward is money. That's enthusiasm, number one, and then money that follows the enthusiasm. But that's really what's going to make this place real, is when people get excited about it and understand what it can do and what it can do for the community.
I have a question about procedure here. Are we taking a break and then coming back after lunch so we can, because I do have things that I could share thoughts about what you guys have presented, but I don't want to delay us from going to lunch either.
So the idea was to take a lunch break, in part because you can only focus so long without standing up and eating or drinking something. We have set aside, I think, about an hour in our original outline that we could answer additional questions. I think after an hour, we would like to formally adjourn the meeting, and Tom has requested that sort of their core group and Bill and I just sort of have a debrief and talk about sort of final steps. We also, I'm watching the sun out there, and it looks like an amazing day. We started this project with a field trip so that we have a grounding in a real place and real site and buildings. We think, at least for the design team, it's incredibly helpful to go back out and walk, and we have a smaller version of the plan, and just walk out there, and anyone is welcome to join us, and we're going to walk and say, okay, this is where the building is, okay, the parking lot's there. We'll stand at the caretaker's house and say, what kind of view do we really have? And we always learn things by doing that, and we say, oh, well, the plan's not quite right, or we hit it. And so we reserve some time for that. So in the big picture, I think if we adjourn for lunch, take a half an hour, I think we want to try to wrap things up in an hour or so.
And I would encourage you to get on with the view up at the site. Don't worry about meeting with our little group. We can do that anytime. I don't want to.
Yeah, that's what I was
Okay.
going to suggest.
Okay,
I think
so with that, we flew down here our flight's not until 7 o'clock. We have lots of time, so I think that's a great suggestion. Maybe we have lunch, we answer any more questions if people want to answer Steve's question. We'll do that for a little bit, and then I think we take a field trip, and then up at the site, we'll walk around, and then we'll adjourn for the day sometime shortly thereafter.
Thank you.
Thank you.